Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, glad to have you aboard today. We got a great show for you. I guess it's Wednesday, hump day. To me, it's 2 days closer to going fishing, but that's just the way my calendar kind of works. But we got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about the ramifications of the verdict yesterday in the Chauvin case, that is the George Floyd case. And in case you're just tuning in and don't know, the officer, and we'll get into some details in a minute, but the officer in question, Mr. Chauvin, the one that had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, got convicted of all the charges, I think third, second degree murder and manslaughter. And his actual sentencing is scheduled for a couple of months from now. And he could get up to 40 years in prison. And I would assume he would probably get it at minimum half of that. But that's just my opinion based on what we've been listening to so far. And he may get the full shebang. But the good news, I suppose, is, and I'm going to get into it more in a minute, is there wasn't really any major problems yesterday, and we'll talk about that as far as burning, but it could still happen, but we'll speak about that. And then if we have time, we're going to get into George W. Bush. We hadn't talked about old W. Bush much in the last few years, really, but certainly in the last year or two. But he's come out now and attacked the Republican Party, basically attacking the Republican Trump version of the Republican Party, and we'll get into that. But before we go any further, we always have to talk about our sponsors, because without them, we wouldn't be able to do the show. And our number one sponsor is Big Daddy Unlimited, otherwise known as BDU, your Second Amendment headquarters. Now, to find links to all of our sponsors, look above the video, no matter when or where you're watching it. You'll see a brief description of what we're talking about on a daily basis, and you will see links to our show. Links to our sponsors of our show. Big Daddy Unlimited, you get factory direct pricing on guns, ammunition, and more. At least 100,000 other items that are related, like tactical gear, protective gear, even swag that's Second Amendment related. Check it out. That's the next one. You get factory direct pricing, Big Daddy Unlimited. They are your Second Amendment headquarters because they literally are protecting your Second Amendment on a daily basis. I got to say this before I get into the others. I saw a very funny meme, and I don't usually fall for these kind of things, but I fell for this one because I guess I realize how short guns and especially ammunition are right now. But somebody posted on Facebook that they had found some ammunition, and they had a big picture of it, like racks and racks of ammunition, and they had a description of it. And it said, like, I finally found ammunition, and they were about to put the name of the place, and it had the see more little click tab if you've been on Facebook, where you get to see like 2 paragraphs more. And if you tried to click on the see more, there wasn't nothing to it. It didn't take anywhere, so they baited and switched you. I personally thought it was funny, but, I got a weird sense of humor. Anyway, the next thing we have is Patriot. Next sponsor, patriotthreads.org, apparel with a purpose. They are your total fulfillment center. That means they can help you with charity events. They can produce terrific sportswear like that has a patriotic theme for your charity. Help you with getting the donations to the proper place and everything else. Remember the initials of our show, John Martin Talks, JMT. For 20% off. Then we have Recoil TV, which is all about the Second Amendment as well. They produce high quality, high production videos on the latest weaponry, ammunition, anything related to the Second Amendment. You can't go wrong on Recoil TV. We have our own YouTube channel, of course. It's spell it all the way out, John Martin Talks, and you can see our show live on there every day. Good morning, howdy, how are you guys on YouTube? We got a growing audience on there, and we appreciate it. But we have a channel within the Recoil TV broadcast, or to their channel, where our show is archived on a daily basis, and we greatly appreciate it. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes, as I like to say, of our program today. We're going to be using a Time article. This is an opinion piece by a gentleman. I'll read you the title in a moment, but his name is Philip Atiba Goff. I've never heard of the gentleman, but he's a professor of African American Studies and Psychology at Yale University, and he kind of does a lot of research on the interaction between the public and police officers, and he's focused a lot on people of color, especially Black Americans' interaction with police officers. As I say, I don't really know much about him, but he's given an opinion piece, and it's a kind of interesting piece. I agree with some of it I don't, but I thought it framed what I think we need to talk about after the George Floyd case and the verdict of yesterday. Here's the title to it, a Time magazine piece. To protect the next George Floyd, we must remove the threat of police violence from everyday life. And this was one of the pictures that was in the article. I don't know how, it's a little bit blurry intentionally, but it basically has the Black Power, Black Lives Matter symbol there of a bunch of cops in somewhat riot gear and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the genesis of how this goes. The portrayal of police officers, by the way, has especially when it comes to people of color, has been of one of a combative nature. That the police officers are literally hunting people. LeBron James even said that a year ago after the George Floyd case, that police officers were literally hunting Black American males. So all of this has added to the rhetoric. Before we go any further, before we get into the article, I was thinking a lot about this on my drive over. It takes me about 45 minutes to an hour to get to the studio. And I was thinking about how I felt about the case of George Floyd. I haven't talked a whole lot about it, but now is the time to actually, I believe, talk more about it. And I got to tell you, because I told you, and I'm just going to own up to this. I told you that I thought we were going to burn no matter what happened in the case. That, for the moment, doesn't appear to be true, and I'm glad I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong on a continuous basis when it comes to that. I suspect that I won't be, and I'm not looking for vindication. But I got to tell you that there was a part of me that when I heard the verdict didn't surprise me. Let's put it that way first. The verdict didn't surprise me, but I got to own up to the fact that there was a part of me that was relieved that the verdict came in that way. Now, I know a lot of people feel that way, and dadgum few would admit it, especially on the air. But let me expand on that just a minute. First of all, I think that the verdict was predictable and probably justified in some ways. There's some aspects of the murder charges, because, all murder charges to a certain extent imply some level of intent, not like premeditated, but that you got into a situation and at some point you consciously made a decision, well, I'm going to take this guy out. I think that's difficult to prove. Although, based on the evidence that was presented, I can understand why people would come to that conclusion. So I say that to say this. I'm not surprised by the verdict. I'm not necessarily troubled by the actual verdict. It could have gone different ways, but I'm not really troubled by the verdict. But what troubles me is that I was almost, I won't say hoping for the verdict, but maybe relieved that we didn't have a burning, which I thought we were going to have. As I say, we still might. But I have to admit that it bothers me that I actually feel that way. Because the biggest problem I have, beyond the obvious facts of the case, the killing of George Floyd and all that, I mean, think about it. Multiple lives are destroyed by this, including the police officer. Basically, he's going to probably spend the rest of his life in jail. Not necessarily saying he doesn't deserve it. I'm simply saying that there are tragedies across the board in this case, because I'm sure that officer didn't wake up that day thinking he's going to go out, kill George Floyd, and end up being tried and probably sentenced to prison. But what really bothers me is, I'm trying to make sure I'm making sense on this. I'm not saying that the jury came out with the wrong decision, but I'm troubled by the mob mentality of this, if that makes sense. That somehow, and we go back to what like Maxine Waters said, and she was like at the pinnacle of all of this stuff. She chimed in on it right at the worst time, or maybe the best time if you're trying to influence the jury. But the idea that this guy was guilty, he was guilty, but trust me, the majority of the people on the left had this dude hung. They would have literally bum rushed his house and hung the dude or burned him inside. So, Chauvin really had never had a chance. I'm not really saying that the jury was wrong. I'm simply saying that I'm troubled by the fact that I found some relief in a way in the conviction. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe some of y'all can help me out with this if you felt the same way. But I feel guilty about it a little bit, I suppose, because of the fact that I do think that this jury was influenced, certainly the case, certainly the attitude across America was very one-sided, at least in the media. And I think it impacted this case, and it just overall bothers me. All right, let's get into to the article itself. As I say, once again, if you're just tuning in, this is an opinion piece in Time magazine, and it is written by a Yale professor named Philip Goff. We'll get into it. The accountability provided by the conviction of Derek Chauvin is both necessary and insufficient. Necessary and insufficient. First, my first thought on that is that the left is never, ever satisfied. That's why I tell you about this progressive leftist. And let me go ahead and state my political goal if you're new to the show. My only political goal, and it's not necessarily related directly to this case, but is to stop the progressive takeover of this country, period. And I judge everybody, whether you're running for dog catcher, outhouse, the White House, whatever, park bench, Park Avenue, in between. Probably not fair, but I'm judging you based on how you can help me reach my goal, which is to stop the progressive takeover of this country. And I do believe that the left and their position and their narrative on the George Floyd case and many others is designed to actually continue and complete the progressive takeover. So there's always a bit of that. Maybe I'm biased in that sense, but the left is never, ever satisfied. And he says here it's necessary, this writer, because the public system worthy of trust can never take root without accountability. But here's the thing. Accountability is a two-way street. It's a two-way street. In other words, I don't have any issue with the police departments and police officers being held accountable for their actions. But this writer never talks about anywhere in this article about the accountability of, say, for instance, let's just say it like it is, George Floyd. George Floyd is as much responsible for his death, and I know a lot of people aren't going to like this, as that officer was. Because George Floyd put himself in a position to be harmed. I mean, even if I used to have I used to be a substance abuse counselor, and I had this group one time, one of the tougher groups at first, and then one of the more fulfilling groups I've ever done. An old white dude. I wasn't quite as old as I am now, but I was a white dude. And the reason I say that is because the group was all black males that were out on parole, not probation, but parole from prison. And if they got a drug violation or whatever, they're going right back in. So part of their parole was they had to come to this type of group. And you can imagine that they looked at me like, what the heck are you going to, old country boy like me? What are you going to talk about? You know, how are you going to help us? And they kept talking about how corrupt the system, that I didn't understand how corrupt the court system, the police, the prison, all that was. So finally, after 2 or 3 sessions like this, I said, look, let me ask you this. Let me just ask you. Let's just assume, let's just take what you're saying as face value truth, that the whole system is totally corrupt and the man, so to speak, the white man is out to get you. Let's say that is 100% true. And they're going, yeah, like I'm finally coming around. I said, the question I have for you is, if you know that the system is totally corrupt, why do you keep putting yourself in a position for that system to take a hold of you? Why do you keep doing things that you know for a fact are going to put you in harm's way and get you in this corrupt system when you admit that you know that it's corrupt? And that's the thing that never gets talked about. George Floyd put himself in a position to be harmed because he was violating the law, had a long track record, and not to mention that he resisted arrest. Don't resist arrest. Just don't do it. So accountability is a two-way street. On with the article. Insufficient because, this is what the writer says, insufficient because no trial outcome can repair the devastation that George Floyd's killing visited upon his family, the Minneapolis community, and everyone forced to grieve yet another loss in an era, his words, not mine, defined by it. Well, First of all, I would ask why. Why is it an era defined by it? Why is it? I actually, and this is not absolving anything, but I do believe that the media and the Democrats working hand in hand have blown this out of proportion. And I'm not talking about the George Floyd case. I'm talking about this idea, like James said, that black Americans are literally being hunted by police officers. I just don't believe that. Now, I also do believe that there are problems, and there has been systemic problems over the years with police officers, with police departments, and people of color. I'm not denying that in any way, shape, or form. But to basically say, in many cases, they say right off the bat, we're worse off now than we ever have been, is simply not true. And I believe that the reason this era, if you want to call it that, is defined by this is because the media and their partners in the Democratic Party, or vice versa, have been pushing this narrative for political reasons. And the thing that troubles me the most about the Floyd case, kind of tying back what I said before, we were pretty well unified when this first happened. The vast majority of Americans were shocked by this, felt like it was an injustice, felt like the police officer was at some capability, how much was, but I don't remember, everybody pretty much decried this as an injustice. But politics interjected itself into it, and the next thing you know, we're at opposite sides of an area we once agreed to. So I do believe there's culpability in the media and politicians in general, but especially the Democratic Party. In the end, back to the writer here, he says murder trials cannot deliver justice. The only possible justice comes from what we choose to do next. And generally, I agree with that statement. It is about learning lessons and what we do next. I'm afraid he and I may disagree on what lessons learned, and we'll get into that. Much of the public safety, according to the writer here, is maddeningly complex. Maybe so. This much is not. The more situations we inject the possibility of deadly force into, the more dead bodies we end up with. If the presence of armed officers, and this is a big part of what he's talking about in this article, the fact that we have armed police officers, he makes a strong case, or at least a case, that is what causes all of this gun violence and interaction between people of color and the police, is the fact that the police are armed. I don't really agree with that. I think he makes a couple of decent points, and we'll get into that. But he says here, if the presence of armed officers is a constant and is in tragic outcomes, that should prompt us to ask, where can we do without them? But see, right off the bat, he fails to acknowledge that the George Floyd case, as tragic as it is, had nothing to do with arms. There were no arms drawn. There were no arms fired. I don't even know if they actually even used a taser on the guy. So the fact that the police officers were armed had no impact on this case. In fact, if you want to call it murder, which Mr. Chauvin is convicted of, it was murder by knee, not by weapon. The weapon of choice was the human body. And more people are killed, by the way, by physical violence than they are by gun violence by a long shot. Local activists, officials, and community leaders are asking those questions and coming up with new answers. Are they really? I'm not sure about that. They're successfully challenging the assumption, they probably are doing that, ingrained among many whose circumstances have insulated them from state-sponsored violence. That's what he's called, a state-sponsored violence, basically government shooting somebody. That an armed officer makes in any situation safer. In other words, he's basically saying that by the very nature of being an armed police officer, you're escalating the situation. I'm not so sure I agree with that. I mean, there's some aspects of that are worth looking at, but because in England, they don't have an armed police officer. They got more now than they ever have had, because crime escalates and that kind of thing. But he says local activists and official community leaders are asking these questions. Well, if they are, they're certainly not getting played in the mainstream media, because the only thing I see in the mainstream media, and I'm talking about even CNN and all, is when they talk about things, is let's listen to this person, these people that were chanting outside. It was in a neighborhood. I think it was actually, and we're going to talk about this stabbing and shooting here in just a moment. I believe this was in result of the teenager that was shot in Columbus, Ohio. I'm not exactly sure. It's in a neighborhood. But listen to what these guys are saying. These are Black Lives Matter activists. This guy's talking about activists. These are Black Lives Matter activists. Listen to what they have to say. Check it out.
In a 242, is this what it's coming to here in America? God damn! United States of America! We're not gonna sit here and just sit around while you shoot and kill us and go back in the suburbs.
What did y'all do? Over and over! Keep killing us!
We're sick!
We in this stuff!
Maybe it needs to be an eye for an eye, y'all!
That's it! Yes, sir!
They shoot us! We shoot them!
We control our whole community! Right?
That's good enough. I like the last part there. The guy that's walking around shouting as well. He says, we control our own community. Well, to use the Democrats' term, if true, and it should be true, people should take a more active role in their community. If true, then why don't you do it? If true, then why are neighborhoods burned to the ground? To me, and I said this yesterday, there is no justification. I don't care if you're 100% right. In other words, whatever you're protesting, you're 100% right. A total injustice has been done. It does not justify violent protests, burning down places, shooting people, attacking people violently. There is no justification that. You have no right to do that. Chris Cuomo said, where does it say that protests have to be peaceful? In the Constitution, you nitwit. It says in the First Amendment, peaceful assembly, the right to peaceful assembly. And you have that right, and I will support that and fight for your right, even if I disagree with what you're saying. But no one has a right. My dad used to say, it's real simple about your rights. You have a right to swing your arm all you want to do. But if you hit me, that's where you lose your right, if you're interfering with what I'm doing. And I agree with him. So how do you talk to these activists that are literally saying, you shoot us, we shoot them? They're threatening police. How do you have a conversation with that person? And these are the people that are getting their voices out there more than, if there are moderates out there getting their voices, they're not being heard, I can tell you that. And then I want to play this video. This was right after the Floyd case actually was, the conviction came down on Officer Chauvin. This was right outside the courthouse. And so just to let you know that our police officers aren't the only ones being disrespected, listen to what these people are saying about the National Guard. Check them out. That's good enough. That's good enough. I should have warned you. A couple of these videos have some pretty graphic language, and I'm about to show you one that's pretty graphic, and I got a couple here, so I want to warn you ahead of time. Today's videos are troubling in many ways. They have violence, bad language. I guess I should have put a disclaimer on it. So if there's more to come. So this idea that an armed officer, this writer says, makes any thing safer, that armed officers don't make it safer. Well, I want to play this video, and I got to warn you ahead of time, this is very graphic. This happened. It's kind of hard to see because it's the police body cam, but there's a fight brewing. It's between girls. It's a bunch of girls. They responded to girls fighting was what they were responding to. And I got to tell you, back in my day, girls never fought. I remember we joked about it sometime, but girls are routinely fighting all the time. In fact, it's so bad in a little town south of us here called Ocala, Florida, there's actually a YouTube channel dedicated, and I have to say it's mostly women of color fighting at public places like convenience stores. It's actually so bad, they got a YouTube channel directed to it, and it gets really crazy, man, because these girls, there's no holds barred kind of stuff. But in this case, keep in mind, these officers are responding to a knife, that there's a fight and someone has a knife, and this girl gets tragically shot in the sense that she died at the hospital later, and it's not real clear, but she is about to stab another teenager with a knife. I just want to make sure you understand that as you see what happens when the officer, in my opinion, actually did the right thing. Check it out. That's good enough. There are other angles. One that actually shows the knife laying on the ground. But what you see right there at the end, so they're coming to a totally chaotic situation. Because this writer kind of implies, and some of it was kind of a long article. I had to edit some of it out. But he implies that, officers are being called to like disputes that really shouldn't bring arms to. Well, what would a social worker be able to do if they walked up to that situation? Because at the very end of that video, what you might not be able to see is one teenager has a knife. It's a steak knife about that long. And she is about to stab this girl that's leaned up on the side of the car. And the officer doesn't have, if the officer does anything other than shoot that person, that young lady is going to stab the other one. Now, if a couple social workers had to come up on the same scene, there might have been, that other girl might have lived, but the one with the getting stabbed probably wouldn't have. So I don't know what the solution is at. And you have to police your own neighborhood. But these kind of things routinely happen, and police officers are called to them. What in the world is the solution to that? It's hard to say. Badges, back to the opinion piece here. Badges and guns are used mostly, and this is where I really got some issue with. Badges and guns are used mostly for problems that are ill-suited to solving. He says traffic enforcement may be the most glaring example. Vehicle stops are frequently cited as the routine law enforcement function most likely to escalate into violence. Why is that? According to a recent Stanford Law Review article, however, officers instigate that violence more frequently than motorists do. I don't know if that's true or not. I think a lot, I can tell you right now, and I've talked to police officers about this, there is nothing scarier than walking up to a car that you don't know who's in it, and a lot of these people have highly tinted windows and everything else, that you don't know who's in it, and you're walking up to it, and you're alone by its very nature, because most traffic stops involve only one police officer, at least to start with. It is a very scary thing for police officers to do. I've had police officers literally tell me they'd rather kick in a door than they would walk up to a car sometime on a lonely stretch of highway. I gotta show you this video, and I warn you again, it is extremely graphic. This actually happened a few months or maybe even a year, some time ago, but the video was just released within the last couple of weeks. This is in New Mexico. This is by every nature, and it's a little bit long, about 2 minutes long, but I want to play the whole thing because I want to show you how, quote, routine this traffic stop is and how it ends up. Check it out.
Afternoon, sir. My name's Darren Jarrett. I'm with New Mexico State Police. The reason for the stop is your window tint's a little too dark. Dark? Yeah. You mind if I open the door? Or if you want to roll down the window more. Dark? Yeah. I noticed you got temp tags. You got registration for the vehicle?
Yes, sir.
I'll need registration and your driver's license as well. Come with me to my vehicle. That way I can run your name and date of birth, and then that way I can get my return, okay? Go ahead. Shut the vehicle off. If you want, it's up to you.
You can run my name if you want.
Well, I know.
Well, she's on the phone, actually. Babe, can you send me a photo of my license? You can find my wallet?
That'll work. Grab the phone and come with me to my vehicle so I can get the return, and then I can make sure that everything's good.
That's
Okay. I got paperwork I gotta do, you know? Hey, real quick. You have a firearm on you? Yeah. No, I see it. Please, do me a favor. You mind if I you for my safety. All right, hold on. All right, let's go to my vehicle, okay? Come on.
Oh, shit!
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad they didn't show the rest of that. It doesn't get much more peaceful and routine, broad daylight. Now, you could make a case, I suppose, that the officer shouldn't have stopped him to start with. But once he stopped him, it doesn't get much more routine than that. It sounds like it's all peaceful. The officer is probably on guard, but he's certainly less than he would be if he knew the guy had a weapon on him like that. And the guy comes out of the car and literally just murders the police officer in cold blood in broad daylight on a busy highway. But yet you're going to tell me that I don't know that there is such a thing as a routine traffic stop. Now, I've been telling you for months now that I wish we could have an honest conversation about race. I am ready to have one. I try to have one on my show all the time. That's why I said what I said at the beginning of the show. I admit my character defects and faults. I'm willing to have an honest conversation. It is extremely difficult to have one with the left, that's for sure. This next paragraph kind of proves it. Listen to this. It's a little bit lengthy, but listen to it, please. Just last week, this is the writer. Just last week in Brooklyn Center, that's where this Dante Wright was fatally shot, says, let me start over, because I want you to hear the description this officer has of that shooting of Dante Wright. Well, this is where the police officer says she was trying to use her taser but ended up shooting him instead. Listen to this. Just last week in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, Dante Wright was fatally shot as he attempted to drive away from officers who had pulled him over for having expired tags. Officer Kim Potter, a 26-year police veteran, claims she meant to fire her taser. For the sake of argument, we can take her claim at face value. If the danger introduced by Potter's presence was so great that a split-second mistake could result in a fatality, despite her quarter-century of experience, then it surely dwarfed any danger posed by the unarmed Mr. Wright's vehicle registration. His driving away, talking about Mr. Wright, could have been handled with a court summons in the mail. Instead, it ended with a bullet to the chest. So he's painting this picture like this Mr. Wright was just your average run-of-the-mill citizen who happened to be a black male, happened to get stopped for maybe a trivial thing like expired tags. But and you know, other than that, he was a model citizen, right? No danger to society whatsoever. The reality is that Dante Wright was wanted for aggravated assault and gun charges. He actually participated in a home invasion where he choked this woman and stole money from her. And later on, you know, pulled a gun out. So this dude is hardly a model citizen. Now, I'm not justifying his death in any way, but we can't have an honest conversation if you paint Dante Wright as just, you know, a parochial school kid, black kid, you know, all-star athlete and, you know, 4.0 GPA. And I'm exaggerating, but that's kind of how they make it sound like. That this dude, you know, was just a model citizen and oh, by the way, he decided to run. He took off in his car. Well, these officers had read in the tag and all, they knew he was wanted for all this. He's wanted for a gun charge. He's jumping into his car and they don't know what's happening. What if he'd gone? Think about this. They always want to sue these police officers. What if the police officers had stopped him and said, oh, okay, you had expired tag, be on your way. And went down the road and knowing that the guy was wanted, keep that in mind, went down the road and robbed the gas station and shot somebody, which is not out of the realm of possibilities, right? Then what would have happened? They would have been calling these cops everything but a child of God and sued them anyway. Cops are in a tough situation. Part of the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is we don't give due respect to police officers. Now, respect is often earned, but you got to have a modicum of respect for the law in order to have accountability on either side. Let me check my time. Doing okay. Might not get to the Bush story because this is, to me, is a very important story. The mere presence, back to the writer here, the mere presence of an officer with a deadly weapon can make everyone less safe, including the officer. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, roughly 1% of all traffic stops result in physical force. Police pull over more than 19 million drivers every year, and violent interactions remain spottily recorded. So actually, there's not that, you figure out how many times they pull people over, there's not that much violence. Conservatively, this writer says, that creates the potential for deadly force during more than 190,000 stops each year. Or it could, another way to look at it, sir, is it could show there's no such thing as a routine traffic stop. That every time. Now, I want to tell you a brief story of mine. I haven't told this too many times. I'm not particularly proud of it. But this has been a few moons ago before I got sober. I was actually probably in my early 20s. Maybe, I don't know, maybe even, I think I was maybe 19. Well, cut to the chase, I was drinking and doing some other drugs with a friend of mine. And we both got pretty well too inebriated. And I was driving. And I was actually taking him home. And it was another rural town, a little north of where I live. And I didn't know when we stopped at this gas station to fill up, he went inside to pay, that he got in a shouting match with the guy the clerk at the store. I didn't know that. And the clerk actually called the cops on us, not to justify anything. But we got pulled over by a local police officer who arrested me, put us in the back of the car. They were local as far as they were small city. We had to be taken to a county jail, which was about 40 miles away. So they transferred us to county police officers. Now, we're both white, us suspects. The two police officers that, actually it was only one by the time the sheriff got there, was white. They handcuffed me so hard. Now, I had not, to my knowledge, resisted anything. Now, maybe it goes back to my friend and what he did. But they put the cuffs on me so hard that I actually told the officer, I said, man, can you adjust these handcuffs? He said, well, sure I can. And he took his key and he clamped them down even harder. They were trying to make a example of us. They took me to this county jail. They put me in a cell, handcuffed, with another prisoner in the dark that I couldn't see, but I could hear. Turned out it was I'm just telling you the true story. It was a very big black man. I'm handcuffed. I'm thinking, I don't know how this is going to turn out. And he actually ended up being a pretty nice guy. He said, oh, don't worry, they're trying to screw with you. Anyway, I say all that to say I never resisted arrest during that time. I felt like I was in danger for sure, but I tried my best to comply, as a drunk can maybe, with a police officer. Now, they didn't have cameras or anything else like that. So I understand a little bit, and I've had a couple of other instances. I understand a little bit, I had another instance I won't get into, that if I thought while I was getting stopped, and I was totally innocent this time, I was sober and everything else, where I thought if I'd have been a black man, they might have whipped my behind. But maybe I'll tell that story another time because it's interesting. I don't want to get too far off track. But there's no such thing as a routine traffic stop. But he goes on, he cites a bunch of different things that they're doing attempts, and I can't get into all of them, but one of them kind of stood out to me. He says in March, the city of Baltimore announced that it would continue its pandemic-era policy of declining to prosecute low-level traffic offenses. In other words, you can get away with it altogether. Based on the data, this is one of the most obvious steps we can take to reduce racial disparities and violence in policing, which could be true. But let me tell you this, if police officers, if places routinely, and I drive a lot, man, I drive a lot. I can tell you this, that driving a vehicle by far, even for black males, is one of the most dangerous things you can do regardless of it's crazy out here, at least where I live. It's getting more dangerous all the time. And so if police officers actually stop pulling people over for routine traffic violations, I think we're going to have more deaths on that than any gun violence we've ever had. So to me, I'm actually, and I can tell you this, when I used to be mayor of my little city, people would come in and complain that they wanted more policing on the highway, not less. But then he makes a case about mental illness and how maybe cops shouldn't go to some of these things. And I'm in some agreement with some of this, but the problem is you never know what a situation is going to be like. I mean, you get a report on 911 report that there are teenage girls fighting in a neighborhood. Now, your first thing might be that, yeah, we could send a couple of negotiators out there and stop this. But what are they going to do? You never know when you're going to pull up there and their girl's about to stab the other one. I mean, it's very difficult. It sounds good on paper, but it's very, very difficult to predict what is actually going to happen. But he goes about the mental illness. He said, the unavoidable truth is that armed police respond to these situations because we ask them to. He's right about that. Through collective police policies over decades and 911 calls, we systematically disinvest from or fail to imagine more equitable systems to address community problems, particularly in black neighborhoods, and use policing to fill the gaps. In many communities, he says, that has made armed officers the only public safety tool available, weaponizing the response not only to nonviolent offenses, but routine civil complaints. And he may have a point there, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not denying it. But it kind of gets into this chicken or the egg thing to me. Which came first? The violence that the cops are responding to, or the cops responding and the violence? I mean, I see what he's trying to say here. But we don't live in that world. I wish the left always paints this picture of nirvana. But we live in a reality. And the reality is there are some pretty bad neighborhoods. And there's a lot of killing going on. I mean, in Chicago, for instance, there is so much routine killing that happens to mostly be black on black that they don't even report it anymore. But police officers still got to go in there. So I don't know which comes first. I see what he's trying to say. And I'm not saying we don't need to make some changes. Let me check my time. Back to the article. We're probably not going to get into the Bush article. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow, Friday. It's an interesting piece. We are required to accept neither the status quo, this is his opinion, of armed police or our public safety tool, nor the list of names that won't stop growing. That's a quote from George Floyd's brother, actually. Developing the right responses will require determined imagination. We have never done it before in our nation's history, but until today, no white officer in Minnesota had ever been held accountable for killing a black person, which means breaking from history is possible, and in this case, welcome. So he's talking about all these reforms, and I don't disagree with some of that. I'm not saying we can't make some changes. That implied immunity, which I've explained in detail, I can't agree with that at all, because if we do away with that, we do away with police departments, period. But here's the thing. We need to have a level of respect for police officers. You need to comply with them. I'm not trying to pretend I know exactly what it's like to be a young black male, but I know this. No matter what, if you resist arrest, it ends badly. Nothing good can come from that. And you also have to understand where the cops are coming from, because now they don't even have support of their city commissions, mayors, and things like that. And they get to hear this chanted out from American citizens about how they feel about them. Listen to this video.
Fry like bacon, pigs in a blanket. 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 Marching at the state fair.
Pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. How do you think you would feel if you were a 12-year-old boy or girl, and your father or mother was a police officer, and you had such great respect for them, and then you turn on the TV or going through YouTube and you hear people, pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon? How would you feel about that? I mean, I just can't imagine how police officers must feel about that. There's something else my dad said, and I have a lot of respect for my late father. I call it the crooked barber story. He used to say that there's no evidence that there's more crooked police officers or crooked politicians than there are crooked barbers. He said the difference is in the level of harm they can do. A crooked barber just give you a bad haircut. A crooked police officer could do what Chauvin did. So there's certainly a level of harm that can be done. And I'm not advocating. We need to root that out. And good cops hate bad cops. I can tell you that from my experience and talking to them. But what do we do about it? How do we have an honest conversation? I'm ready, sir. I'm ready to have an honest conversation with this professor. And I'm not saying I couldn't, but I'd love to have one. But it's so one-sided what he's saying here. He's saying that police officers are the problem. And I just refuse to accept that without accountability on the other side. And how can you possibly talk to these people on the left when they never criticize? I just played you that pigs in a blanket. We're going to close the show with this. I'm going to play you another video that I have not heard. Maybe they're out there. I've not heard one elected, especially Democrat, actually condemn this because it's Black Lives Matter. But listen to what they're saying. What do we want? Dead. That is in New York City, by the way, roughly a year ago. What do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them now? Does Joe Biden or Kamala Harris ever condemn that? Did the mayor of New York City even condemn that? I mean, how can you allow people to literally be advocating? I mean, they want to talk about inciting violence. You literally have people chanting, what do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them now? But this writer, who I'm assuming is pretty liberal, professor at Yale probably at least, but how can I have an honest conversation with you if you make it sound like it's only police officers that are the issue? They're not. They're absolutely not. I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go directly to our various social media sites, like them, share them with others. I'll pray for your family. You pray for mine. Please support our sponsors. Let's pray for this great nation, because, man, does she need it and deserve it more than ever. But above all else, like I say each and every day, from my heart, from my family to yours, have a blessed day.